Thank you. Thank you, Suzanne. Shabbat Shalom, good morning. I'm truly delighted to have the opportunity to teach Torah, little Torah, with this Kihila Kedoshah, this sacred community. I'm also honored to be able to share some Torah in the presence of Kavod Harav, Rabbi Moses. I've long been an admirer of his. He's been incredibly helpful and gracious in welcoming me. I said this before, but I'll just repeat it again for those who weren't here last night. I said it last night, which is that Judith and I have been just really struck by the warmth, generosity, and graciousness of our welcome, and we're deeply grateful. I'd like to think through with you in my remarks the meaning of love. It's an ambitious task. I promise to keep my remarks relatively brief, but it is relatively brief. I told this joke yesterday, but I'll say it again. You know how sometimes you take a watch off? A speaker will take a watch off to keep track of time. So the joke is, what does it mean when a rabbi takes his watch off? Absolutely nothing. In any case, I want to talk about love. After all, every time we say the Shema, right, we're commanded, V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha, love God. And in our parsha, as I'll discuss, we're commanded, V'ahavta l'orecha kamocha, love your fellow as yourself. And my question is, what does it mean? Really, what does it mean to love God and to love other people? Now, the topic of love itself is often thought to be the central focus of another religion, that is Christianity, which is true. But sometimes this fact persuades at least some Jews that it's not also central to our own religious tradition. In fact, nothing could be further from the truth. Love is no less central to Judaism than to Christianity. Sof pasuk, full stop. Indeed, my teacher and friend Rabbi Shai Held is almost finished with a book on precisely this claim. Our double parasha, Acharei Mot Kedoshim, contains endless riches, but it's the 19th chapter of Leviticus, as I mentioned earlier, in Parashat Kedoshim, with its beautiful ethical teachings, that usually gets all the attention. And I admit that I'm drawn to it every year we reach this stage in the cycle of Torah readings. This chapter seeks to root the idea of Kedusha, of holiness, not just in our vertical relations, so to speak, with the divine, but in our horizontal connections to our fellow human beings as well. Among the many details in Kedoshim, a very famous phrase stands out. I just mentioned it. Love your fellow as yourself, v'ahavta l'orecha kamocha. These words are so well known, at least in part, because the great second century sage Rabbi Akiva describes them as a klal gadol b'Torah, as the klal gadol b'Torah, that is the fundamental principle of the Torah. However, as is of course customary in our tradition, there's a disagreement. Rabbi Akiva's claim does not go unchallenged. As we learn in an ancient midrash, love your fellow as yourself, Rabbi Akiva teaches that this is the fundamental principle of the Torah. Ben Azai teaches that an even greater principle is Zeh Sefer Toldot Adam. This is the record of Adam's line in Genesis 5. Now, Ben Azai's teaching is an odd choice for the central pivot around which the entire Torah turns, obviously lacking the grandeur and ethical clarity of Rabbi Akiva's preference. Why would Ben Azai have chosen such a seemingly prosaic line from our parasha as the most important principle in the whole Torah? Our search for an answer begins with the second half of the verse he cites, which reads, "When God created Adam, God made him in God's image." Pointing to these words, one of the great sages of 17th century Morocco, Rabbi Aharon ibn Chaim, offers a beautiful interpretation, a beautiful understanding of the disagreement between Rabbi Akiva and Ben Azai. He teaches, love your fellow obligates one to love from a sense of re'ut, which I'll translate as fellowship alone, fellowship. But This is the record of Adam's line, commands love from a more essential place of achava, brotherhood. Moreover, it shows us that we all come from one image and form, God's image. To put it in modern language, we might say, drawing on Rabbi Ibn Chaim, that re'ut, fellowship, is somewhat formal and abstract, like the bond between citizens, let's say, while brotherhood or sisterhood is organic and intimate, closer to the love between family members. No one person can claim to be superior to another in this teaching, since we all come from the same parents, so to speak. Ben Azai's central principle of the Torah is rooted in our tradition's insistence that all human beings ultimately belong to one family. We're all brothers and sisters, and are therefore bound to one another in a kind of familial solidarity. Now, as lovely as Ben Azai's principle is, it's not quite the straightforward expression of universalism that it appears to be. I want to suggest that this teaching by Ben Azai has something profound to tell us, to teach us about the nature of love itself. If there's one thing we all know about families, it's that they're complicated. The love between parents and children, siblings, spouses, is rooted in the concrete, in the particular. It's not like the love between citizens in a country. It's very concrete. Put another way, human love, as it's actually experienced by us, is by nature what I'll call discriminatory, since it's something we feel for a small number of particular people in our lives. Actual love is experienced very differently than the abstract, dreamy, rapturous ideal described by philosophers and poets. Put another way, loving everyone is the same as loving no one. The Israeli writer and scholar Hillel Halkin writes, "To love truly is always to love the few and not the many, to feel more responsible for some than for others, to be willing to risk one's life for this person and not that person. This makes love unfair, which is why we value it so much. Woe to the child whose mother, seeing it and a stranger's child in danger, hesitates which to rescue first, because she loves all children equally." To make a new and somewhat awkward twist on an old cliche, love is always having to make difficult preferential choices. Our sages recognize this when they determine the order of priorities in giving tzedakah according to halakha. The first priority goes to poor relatives living in one's home. And even here, there's an established order. The needs of one's poor parents take precedence over those of one's poor children, who in turn come before poor siblings, and then all the other poor relatives. After family, one must prioritize the poor of one's own neighborhood, followed by the poor of one's town, followed by any poor person. Of course, discriminatory love, as I've described it, can go too far, shading into clannish insularity and self-regard, triumphalism, and even extreme nationalist chauvinism. And needless to say, universalism obviously has great benefits as well, and is as central to Judaism as the inspiring visions of the Hebrew prophets. That said, the concrete reality of achava, of brotherly or sisterly love, is essential as well. Since privileged relationships among families, peoples, groups, societies, and even between God and human beings are the foundation, I think, of true multiculturalism, so important in Canada, of human difference and variety over uniformity and sameness. For those who value what the English poet Jared Manley Hopkins describes as all things counter original, spare, strange. Ben Azai's fundamental principle of the Torah, this is the line of Adam, is anything but prosaic. It is as precious, as holy, and as complex as the love between family members. Now, I could wrap up, but I have to say that there's just one more klal gadol b'Torah, the most important general principle in the Torah, that can help us understand the true meaning of love. And that's the position cited in a later teaching by one Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, who was an early Talmudic sage who lived in the land of Israel in the 3rd century. Rabbi ben Pazi asserts that the most important teaching in the Torah is, fasten your seatbelts here, one sheep shall be offered in the morning and a second in the afternoon. That's the most important teaching in the whole Torah. Now, in case your eyes glazed over while I read it, I'll say the verse again. It's from Exodus 29. One sheep shall be offered in the morning and a second in the afternoon. What can this possibly mean? How can Rabbi ben Pazi possibly think that such a prosaic text is the central principle in the entire Torah? Fortunately, we have some help. The great 16th century sage, the Maharal of Prague, offers some insight. Ben Pazi's teaching, he writes, is more inclusive than the other verses because it emphasizes that a person should serve God with constancy. The verse, he points out, refers to the Tamid sacrifice, which was offered every morning and evening. And he goes on to say, this is the basis of the Torah, because the intended purpose is for a person to be a servant of God with constancy. And the rest of the Torah is commentary. In loving God, our fellow Jews, and our fellow human beings, consistency, constancy, may just be the most important thing in the world. The point is not really that the twice daily sacrifice is the most significant mitzvah. It's that in order to affirm God with the totality of who we are, and in order to love others in all of what we do, regularity and steadfastness are essential. Now, I have to concede that romantic passion, intense passion, does matter, of course. In serving God, as in loving another person, not really feeling it can be disastrous. We all know this. But our brit, our covenant, like marriage, is not built on deeply felt experience alone, but also on loyalty, faithfulness, and just showing up. This is what the seemingly boring verse cited by Rabbi ben Pazi reminds us. There is no sustained spiritual life. Indeed, no sustained loving relation with God and with our fellow human beings without constancy, discipline, and commitment. This may be the most all-encompassing, essential, and for many of us, most challenging principle in the Torah. Now, to illustrate this point, I want to close my Dvar Torah with a scene from a beautiful movie called Paris Je t'aime. A reminder, by the way, that I'm a huge film buff, and I lived in Los Angeles for over 2 decades, a few short miles from a number of studios in Hollywood. So just full disclosure, I will often refer to film in my teaching. This movie, Paris Je t'aime, a French movie, was released in 2006, and it consists of 20 5-minute films, each created by a different director and each commenting on some aspect of contemporary Paris. The one I'd like to share with you is called Bastille, as in Bastille, by Isabelle Coixet. An unnamed man in his early 50s is sitting in a restaurant waiting for his wife of many years. As he waits, we hear a voiceover. It's him telling us that between the entree and the dessert, he will tell his wife that he no longer loves her and is leaving her for another woman, thus ending the marriage. He shares with the audience certain aspects of their life together that had grown tiresome or annoying. And then his wife walks into the restaurant. No sooner does she sit down than she begins to weep. The man thinks his wife knows what's coming, but he quickly discovers that he's wrong. She has just come from her doctor's office, where she's been diagnosed, alas, with terminal leukemia. She tells him that she only has a few months to live. He immediately decides to devote himself to her care, and he's true to his word. He reads to her, he brings her her favorite foods, and so forth. And through these small acts of devotion, he falls in love with her again. The man leaves the other woman, the woman with whom he'd had the affair, and rededicates himself to his wife's well-being. As the narrator puts it, by acting like a man in love, I became a man in love again. We're told that when she died in his arms, he never recovered. As a pulpit rabbi, I've encountered many, many congregants who've utterly devoted themselves to parents or to spouses who are seriously ill or dying. They do this, of course, out of love. But what kind of love is it? It's not the love of fireworks and walks on the beach, but the love of constancy, of the prosaic, of everyday care and commitment. This is the type of love demanded of us by our holy Torah, in our relationships with God and with other Jews and with other human beings. That is the love that sustains the Brit, the covenant. And that is truly Klal Gadol BaTorah, the great and abiding principle of our tradition. Shabbat Shalom. Bruchim Tiyom.